Hosea 8. And this is God speaking, and he says, "How can I give you up, O Ephraim? How can I hand you over, O Israel? My heart recoils within me. My compassion grows warm and tender." As is the case in pretty much every book in the minor prophets, God speaks directly more in one book than he does in the entire canon of the New Testament. To me, that is just overwhelming, that in each of these little studies that we do, we get to see God speaking directly, with the quotes around. And you will not see anything like it, like you will in Hosea. Buckle up, because you're about to see the heart of God like you've never seen it before. If you have studied this book and you know what it's about, then you know just how powerful the words of God can be. If maybe you have just an introductory knowledge or less of this book of Hosea, know that maybe like no other book in the whole canon of Scripture, the heart of God is on full display. Here's our outline, and know that this study will be longer. I updated the minutes, and so it reflects not a 30-minute sermon. In the times where it's between 5 to 10, think it's probably closer to 10. In the time when it's 15 to 20, it'll be closer to 20. You may call me Pharaoh. I will not let the people go. We are going to be here for a bit. You can scan this if you want access to the PowerPoint. Look for the sermon called Minor Prophets _Hosea if you'd like to have the information. My PowerPoints for a traditional 30-minute sermon are about 30 slides. This PowerPoint is 93 slides. I do not anticipate keeping you here for an hour and a half in the sermon. I also anticipate keeping you longer than 30 minutes. Let's do a series overview. As is my custom in this, I want to just give you a taste of what it would be like for these people during this time. And so we'll look at the history, we'll look at the prophet, we'll look at literature, and just get a brief glimpse of what they were experiencing. So put on your Jewish reading glasses, right? As we always do, we want to look at these through the eyes of the way that they would see it. A 21st century American reader may not appreciate what a 7th century BC Jewish reader would appreciate when reading this text. And so it's so easy for us to just check off Hosea and the other prophets in our Bible reading as we go through. But let's not do it. Let's put them on, right, Bear? He's got it. Here we go. We're during a time of Bible history called the divided kingdom. And when we zoom in on the divided kingdom, we know that Israel has been split into two nations, one called Israel, the other taking the name Judah. We know that the world powers greatly impact these Bible lands, even though those world powers are sometimes really far away. During this time, we're in the world power of Assyria. Did you know that Assyria was the first, at least in my understanding, to crucify? It was different than the Roman crucifixion. It was more like a pole that was sharpened on one end and stuck in the ground, and then you stuck the person on top. They were cruel. A cruel, cruel people. And they were God's instrument. Now there's the Bible lands down there in the I guess, southern part of the map. But their empire is expanding. And while there's this threat of Assyrian invasion in the Promised Land, times are good. It's stable. And so a lot of bad things are starting to happen because of the prosperity. Now there's injustice. Because of the injustice, there's now idolatry. And God has sent the prophets, but nobody's listening. And so what happens when plain preaching doesn't work anymore? If you remember from the very first study, as George Batty would say, when plain preaching doesn't work, sometimes you got to get crazy. And he said it just like that. How did the prophets get crazy? Isaiah was told to walk around naked for 3 years to symbolize what would happen to the people when they were taken into captivity and marched out of the city in utter embarrassment and shame. Jeremiah was told to walk around in chains and with a yoke, and he was not allowed to marry. Ezekiel was not allowed to cry when his wife died, and he had to cook food over poo. At first, God said he had to use human excrement, and he said, please do not make me do that. And so God relented and let him use cow manure. Hosea had to marry a wife of whoredom, as the ESV calls it. And then he had to give his children dreadful, apocalyptic names. How is that extreme? Well, I shouldn't have to answer the question. But it's extreme because of the chesed. Remember, we've studied this before in other of our prophet studies. There is this covenant loyalty. It's a word that we don't really have in English, so we try to explain it in several different ways. But way back in Exodus, whenever God entered into a covenant relationship with Israel, the closest that we can get to appreciating it is the way that a man and woman stand before a group of people and pledge their life together in marriage. It is a steadfast love, a loving kindness, a covenant loyalty. And yet what's happened is that Israel has reneged on the covenant. She has abandoned her husband. And as this writer says, idolatry is not simply a breach of contractual agreement. Idolatry is spiritual adultery, the breach of the most intimate kind. Now, one more thing about literature before we move into Hosea proper. We're going to see a lot of similes. Now, you may remember from English class, whenever you had to do a pop quiz, what's a simile, what's a metaphor? Well, they're both in Hosea. But a simile uses the words like and as. And there's a lot of them where God says, I am like, or you are like. And as this writer says, figurative language invites the reader to feel God's suffering over his beloved people. I thought about putting a slide with all of the similes and metaphors in Hosea, but that would have made it, instead of 93, it would have been like 150. But I at least want to share with you two. I want you to be on the lookout for the lion and the dove. Can we just humor me with those two? And then I leave it to you, if you'd like to read this book, to find the others later on. Okay, let's jump into the book proper. Hosea, his name in Hebrew, I believe if I were to pronounce that the way they would, is Hosea. And it literally means Yahweh saves, or salvation. That is a great name. And so as he is called when he is a kid, and his parents are saying, Hosea, time for dinner, Hosea. The neighborhood hears that, and what they hear is, Yahweh saves, time for dinner, Yahweh saves. What a great name. We know this because of the first verse. The word of the Lord that came to Hosea, son of Beeri, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and in the day of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. I circle those because that helps us understand the time that it's written, and that it's about a generation before when Assyria wipes the kingdom out. And he's a contemporary of Amos. So if you want to get on Valley Parkway YouTube, find my Amos study. These guys are contemporaries. That's right. There they are. Hosea comes along right before the Assyrian nation destroys them. I love these illustrations. They help explain a lot in a few words. And so hopefully I won't go too quickly. But Hosea's writing is over years. This illustration puts it at 25 years worth into 14 little chapters. Jesus ministered for 3. And he got 4 big gospels filled with all the different preaching. So this is kind of like the highlight reel. The best of the best, condensed down into the briefest amount of his preaching. And he preaches it to the northern kingdom of Israel, and he preaches it because the Assyrian Empire is at the door. And what I want you to think about in this image specific is that Ephraim and Jacob are other names for Israel. I'm going to be saying that a lot in this study because God says, "Oh, Ephraim," and calls out Ephraim. I need you to know that that's Israel. My computer's having a hard time with the transitions. If it's okay with y'all, I'm going to close it out and start it up again, because when I put in multiple hours of work on a PowerPoint and then it starts to act that way, I can't abide by it. So give me, here, I'm opening it back up. Yes, I can start the Spanish as well. Thank you for that reminder. Okay, I've got it on, but now I've lost for the guys in the back. There it is, in reverse. I don't want y'all to see what's coming next. I want to see what's coming next. And here is in Spanish. It wasn't working earlier because I can't get connected to the internet, but it looks like it's working now. How about that? Hosea will focus on Israel's fall from the perspective of relationship, whereas Amos focused on it from the perspective of, here's all the things you're doing wrong. If you would just do them right. Hosea is going to take a bit of a different approach. There's 14 chapters in it. I couldn't find anybody who agreed on how to break it up, and so I decided to go the safe route and break it up into two parts. First, we're going to learn about Hosea and Gomer. Gomer is his wife. In contemporary America, Gomer is not the name of a woman. It's the name of some doofus in the 1950s on television, if you're familiar with Gomer Pyle. But in ancient Israel, when you wear those glasses, and I'll show you what her name means in just a little bit, to the reader, for Hosea to marry Gomer, you would say, wow, what a woman. We're also going to look in verse 4 through 14, as one writer says, the tug of war between Yahweh's desire for grace and his inclination for justice. Well, let's show the summary of Hosea and Gomer. It starts out with Hosea and Gomer getting married, and then she leaves him for a life as a prostitute, or as the ESV will call it, a whore. And she will live this life of whoredom to a point where her lovers abandon her, she has nothing left, and she's sold in the slave market. And God tells Hosea, go buy her back. This is to symbolize God's relationship with Israel, where he made a covenant with his people. And then they played the whore by bowing down to Baal and other idols and not being faithful to God. And so there's two options. One was to end the covenant, and that's the one that God will not take. He will find a way to renew it. But what is so interesting is what happens historically. It looks like he puts them away. How is it going to be accomplished? Visualizing it just a bit more, her harlotry or her whoredom is twofold. And we see that she trusts in political alliances with Assyria and Egypt. Chapter 8 says Ephraim has hired lovers. Though they hire allies among the nations, I will gather them up. Chapter 4 says, my people inquire of a piece of wood, and their walking staff gives them oracles, for a spirit of whoredom has led them astray, and they've left their God to play the whore. They trusted in princes. They trusted in idols instead of trusting in themselves. As a therapist, I use this example all the time. This is the number one motion that I make in my office. The couples that I work with are probably tired of me going like this. But what I try to explain to them is that in a relationship, one person impacts the other. That's just the way it works. The way that you're connected, either securely or insecurely, affects your emotional state. It affects your behaviors. That affects your partner. And so it goes back and forth. And it can go into this crazy cycle, or it can go into this blessed cycle of enriching. And here we have Yahweh and Ephraim in this relationship where God is breathing steadfast love into it. And the expectation is fidelity. Be faithful to me. And yet what happens in this interaction is that Ephraim commits adultery, and this causes God pain. And Ephraim's idolatry and her alliances brings about God's wrath. And that leads to injustice that is happening because she's so unfaithful, which motivates God to be just and to bring his wrath. Now, the word whore is used in the ESV and the Old King James. So if you want a softer word, read one of the other translations. They'll call her a harlot, right? Or prostitute. But these ones don't pull punches. And it's used 17 times in Hosea out of the total 55 in the whole Bible. So literally in this one little book, a third of the time that the concept of whore is mentioned, it's because of what's going on in this book. And I want you finally, as we prepare to go verse by verse, to consider the literary whiplash of the emotional shift. We're going to watch God from one verse to the next. It seems as though it's just this outrageous shift from profuse love and these overtures of return to me to whipping over to wrath and saying, because you've done this, I will remove you from my sight. One writer says, the sudden shifts in mood match the sudden shifts in emotion that a husband might experience towards a faithless wife. Another writer says, Hosea is saturated in the language of reversal. And I can't help but add one more image to it as we prepare to read through the book. I have helped couples. There's something in the Google, I wish I knew how it worked, but the algorithm, they find me. I seem to work exclusively with couples that are going through issues of infidelity. I have helped in relationships where men have been unfaithful. I have helped in relationships where women have been unfaithful. And when they come into the therapy setting, oftentimes they are rocked. One of them is utterly hurt, ultimately betrayed. The other is desperate for connection and wanting to rebuild that trust. They're going to do whatever it takes. And I will tell them, be ready for a roller coaster every day. Because as we work through this and we bubble up the emotions that you're feeling, you could start out in the morning and you wake up and it's your worst nightmare. But by the middle of the day, you've processed it and you're at a better place. But then by the evening, you're back down and you're all over the place. The only difference as we prepare to read Hosea is that as God may be all over the place, God is not reckless. He's not out of control. As Romans chapter 11 states, behold the goodness and the severity of God. And while we might see it from verse to verse, whiplash back and forth, this isn't some vengeful husband who's hurt beyond measure and so his rage bubbles over and it's not appropriate. This is a righteous God who is very much in control of both extremes. I'll tell you this, friends, as we prepare to read from chapters 1 through 3 and 4 through 14, I don't know every relationship in this room. I don't know the way that each couple has got along over the years. And it may be that in this room there are people that have dealt with this betrayal that I'm talking about today. It is not my intention to trigger within you some of those dark times of despair personally. It is, however, the best metaphor that God could use to explain how he feels when people sin. And so I won't hide from it. And I ask you not to hide from it either in a spiritual sense. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Verse 2. When the Lord first spoke through Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, go, take yourself a wife of whoredom and have children of whoredom. For the land commits great whoredom by forsaking the Lord. So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim. Do you know what her name means in Hebrew? Completion. Isn't that what every wife is to a husband? She's his perfect counterpart, according to Genesis chapter 2. And so here we have this perfect counterpart. Scholars are divided. Was she a prostitute before the marriage and he went and married a prostitute, or did she become one after they were married? I tend to lean into the latter because God didn't marry spiritually speaking, a prostitute. God married a people who were powerless, and he gave them great beauty and wealth and honor, and then she spiritually betrayed him. So I think Gomer was a decent woman whenever they got married. She conceived and bore him a son, and the Lord said to him, call his name Jezreel. I won't tell you what his name means yet, but we'll get there. She conceived again and bore a daughter, and the Lord said to her, call her name No Mercy, for I will have no more mercy on the house of Israel. To forgive them at all. And when she had weaned no mercy, she conceived and bore a son, and the Lord said, call his name Not My People, for you are not my people, and I am not your God. So here we have the family tree. Yahweh saves, has married completion. They have 3 children. In Hebrew, it's Jezreel, Lo Ruhamah, and Lo Ami. Lo Ami, it's time for dinner. What is that saying to the community? You know, when Hosea was a kid and his mom called him to dinner, Yahweh saves, Yahweh saves. Now what's being shouted out? Not my people. No mercy. God scatters. It's time to eat. And so every interaction that those children will have in their local community is a reminder to that local community that God is done. But so far, you know, Hosea and Gomer, they are the prophet and the prophet's wife, right? And so they're related. Look at them. Yahweh saves and completion. What a great couple. What standing they must have had in the community. And so it's an odd situation because the scriptures are silent about when it happens, but at some point in their relationship, maybe she starts to sneak out in the night. Maybe she and he have a big blow-up fight and then she moves out. Whatever happens, she's not faithful to him and to the covenant that they made. And so Hosea is left alone with these children. And God, who says, I name them this way because I won't have any more mercy on Israel. And they are not my people anymore. And then God says, look at this. Yet the number of children of Israel shall be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And in the place where it said to them, you are not my people, it shall be said to them, children of the living God. And the children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together, and they shall appoint themselves one head, and they shall go up from the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel. Whiplash. How did God just say, they are not my people? And then in the very next sentence say, they're going to be children of the living God. And great will be the day of Jezreel. Because you know what Jezreel means in Hebrew? It means God will scatter. But you know what you also do? You don't just scatter things by messing it up. You scatter things by throwing it into the ground and watching a harvest grow. Chapter 2. Say to your brothers, you are my people. And say to your sisters, you receive mercy. And then Yahweh speaks to these people about their mother. Could you imagine that kind of a conversation where a father brings his children in to talk about how their mother is moved out and become a prostitute? Plead with your mother. Plead. For she is not my wife, and I'm not her husband. That she put away her whoring from her face and her adultery from between her breasts, lest I strip her naked and make her as in the day she was born, and make her like a wilderness, and make her like a parched land, and kill her with thirst. Upon her children also I will have no mercy, because they're children of whoredom. Whiplash. Same chapter. I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you to me in righteousness and justice and steadfast love and in mercy. I will betroth to you in faithfulness, and you shall know the Lord. And in that day I will answer, declares the Lord. I will answer the heavens, and they shall answer the earth. And the earth shall answer the grain and the wine and the oil, and they shall answer Jezreel. And I will sow. I will sow her for myself in the land, and I will have mercy on no mercy. And I will say to not my people, you are my people. And he shall say, you are my God. Back and forth and back and forth. I told you, the heart of God is on full display here. In righteous anger for a people who were not faithful. Chapter 3, the Lord said to me, go again, love a woman who is loved by another man and is an adulteress, even as the Lord loves the children of Israel, though they turn to other gods and love cakes of raisins. There's nothing wrong with raisin cakes, by the way. But these specific ones are connected to their acts of idolatry. Gomer is gone. Her name, completion, she was meant to be that perfect counterpart to Hosea, is ruptured. It's destroyed. And she's gone off to be with other lovers. But what we're going to find is when Hosea goes to get her, she's being auctioned off. Whoever she went off with didn't want her, and whoever else didn't want her, and it gets to the point where nobody wants her and she has to be sold. Could you imagine, as a marriage partner, going into a place to buy back your spouse because everyone has had their way and now no one wants them? So I bought her back for 15 shekels of silver and a homer and a lethek of barley. And I said to her, you must dwell as mine for many days. You shall not play the whore or belong to another man, and so will I also be to you. And that's the end of Hosea and Gomer. Because this book isn't about them. It's not about their marriage and whether or not she would again complete with him the way her name is intended. It's about Yahweh and Israel. And this is where, when I studied this, a lot of sources stop. And they kind of leave it with Hosea and Gomer, and she comes back, and it's a happy ending, and that's what Jesus can do for you. This book isn't necessarily about that happy ending, because 4 through 14 is a tug of war, and that's what we'll focus on now. Chapter 4, hear the word of the Lord, O children of Israel. The Lord has a controversy, or as the NASB says, he has a legal case. Here is God's covenant lawyer now accusing Israel of covenant breach of contract. And here are the three things that she is guilty of. There's no faithfulness, no steadfast love, and no knowledge of God. Many of you are probably familiar with one of the most famous verses in this book. We quote it often. My people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. Now, as Burton Kaufman suggests, this isn't scientific, secular, or technical knowledge where, oh, my people are destroyed because they can't do long division. You know? If only they knew more things on the periodic table, then my people would be saved. It's not about that. And friends, it's not also about just the technical facts about religion. Right? Can you name all 12 tribes of Israel? I can. That makes me better than you. That's what I'm saying. When people would say that I can know these facts and therefore I'm better. It's not about that kind of knowledge. Hosea, when he's preaching there's no knowledge of God in the land, he's saying it's not just knowing about God. It's about intimately having a relationship with God. In the same way, think about someone you're really close with. Maybe it is your spouse. Maybe it's a friend. And then think about somebody that might know your name, and maybe they know where you work, but little else. They know about you. But your friend, your spouse, they know you. They can read you because they have relationship with you. God wants his people to know and experience his love and what he has in store for us. You all are familiar with, from the minor prophets, the lion. Amos says, thus says the Lord, as the shepherd rescues from the mouth of the lion 2 legs or a piece of ear, so shall the people of Israel who dwell in Samaria be rescued. What does that mean? I'm a city boy. I have never encountered a lion in the wild. All I can do is tell you what others say about it, and you can trust that and Or go find a lion yourself, right? But here's the image that we're supposed to get. If I'm a shepherd and one of my sheep's missing, and I run out and there's a lion and he's looking at me and he's got an ear hanging out of his mouth, it's too late. Is this lion for or against Israel? Look at Joel. The Lord roars from Zion and utters his voice from Jerusalem, and the heavens and the earth quake. But the Lord is a refuge to his people, a stronghold to the people of Israel. Imagine that you are weak and defenseless in the animal kingdom. And then the king, the lion, comes and turns around and roars at every other creature. Is the lion for or against Israel? How do you think it works in Hosea? I will be like a lion to Ephraim, and like a young lion to Judah. I will tear and go away. I will carry off, and no one shall rescue. There won't even be an ear left. Listen as God pours out his heart. What shall I do with you, O Ephraim? What shall I do with you, O Judah? You guys remember in our studies of 1st and 2nd Samuel, David, the king, he had this, I'm going to call him his assassin, Joab. And 3 times David says, what am I to do with you? Because Joab would go off and kill someone or do something really awful, and David didn't know how to deal with it. What am I to do with you, Joab, you son of Zeruiah? Here God is saying it to the whole nation, what am I to do with you? Listen to these similes. Your love, it's like a morning cloud. In Texas, we get this because we wake up and we go, there's clouds. And by 7:30 a.m., they're already evaporated. Like the dew that goes early away. Therefore, I have hewn them by the prophets. I have slain them by the words of my mouth. My judgment goes forth like the light, for I desire steadfast love and not sacrifice. Knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. God doesn't simply want us to know about him. He wants us to know him. He wants a covenant where we're loyal. And when you have been baptized for the remission of sins, you have pledged your life through Jesus to God. And to turn your back is not merely breaking a contract. It's the most intimate kind of betrayal. Okay, take a breath. We're going to fast forward to chapter 11. You might have thought, ooh, we're only in chapter 6. I knew that this would happen. It's a hard chapter. The metaphor shifts. As though it wasn't hard enough already, God will now shift the way he relates to his people and will pour out his heart even more. He says, when Israel was a child, I loved him. And out of Egypt I called my son, and the more they were called, the more they went away. They kept sacrificing to the Baals and burning offerings to idols. And in those verses we have whiplash. Listen to him. Yet it was I who taught Ephraim to walk. I took them up by their arms, but they did not know that I healed them. I led them with cords of love, or with kindness and bands of love, and I became to them as one who eases the yoke in their jaws, and I bent down to them and fed them. Whiplash. They shall not return to the land of Egypt, but Assyria shall be their king, because they have refused to return to me. The sword shall rage against their cities, consume the bars of their gates, and devour them because of their own counsels. My people are bent on turning away from me. Though they call out to the Most High, he shall not raise them up. Whiplash. I taught them to walk, and they walk away. How can I give you up? How can I hand you over? It's hard for me to read. How can I make you like Admah? How can I treat you like Zeboim? My heart recoils. My compassion grows warm and tender. I will not execute my burning anger. I will not destroy Ephraim, for I'm a God and not a man. The Holy One in your midst, I will not come in wrath. I told you that figurative language invites the readers to feel how God feels on the suffering of his people. And I told you to remember the lion and the dove. And we got to read one of them at least. God said, I will be like a lion. We haven't read, and now we will, Ephraim like a dove, silly, senseless, flittering away. But here in chapter 11, as God whiplashes back and forth, I called them, I taught them to walk. They walked away from me. Their city's going to burn down into nothing. I can't give you up. He says, they shall go out after the Lord. He will roar like a lion. When he roars, his children will come trembling from the west. Because God is not roaring at them, but now he's protecting. And he's ready for those who would come home to be home. They'll be like trembling birds and like doves coming back. Whiplash. Because chapter 11, while it is showing us just how God feels, look how it ends. Ephraim has surrounded me with lies, the house of Israel with deceit. Okay. Permit me to read some from the final chapter. In this reading, we're going to see three different speakers. First, Hosea will speak. Then he'll tell Israel what they could say, and then God will speak. Return, O Israel, to the Lord your God, for you've stumbled because of your iniquity. Take with you words and return to the Lord. And he says, say to him this is what you can say. Take away all iniquity, accept what is good. We will pay with bulls the vow of our lips. Assyria shall not save us. We will not ride on horses. We will say no more, our God, to the work of our hands. In you the orphan finds mercy. And if they would just do that, then the Lord would do this. I will heal their apostasy. I will love them freely. For my anger has turned from them. O Ephraim, what have I to do with idols? It is I who answer and look after you. I'm like an evergreen cypress. From me comes your fruit. Whiplash. Why? Because God divorces them. And we know that not from poetic or prophetic or figurative language. We know it from plain historical facts. The king of Assyria invaded the land and came to Samaria and for 3 years besieged it. In the 9th year of Hosea, not the prophet, but the final king of Israel, Hosea, the king of Assyria, captured Samaria. And he carried the Israelites away to Assyria and placed them in Hala and on the harbor and the rivers of Gozan and the cities of Medes. And this occurred because the people of Israel sinned against the Lord their God, who brought them out of the land of Egypt, from under the hand of the Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and had feared other gods. And they did wicked things, provoking the Lord to anger, and they served idols of which the Lord had said to them, you shall not do this. Yet the Lord warned Israel and Judah by every prophet and every seer, saying, turn from your evil ways and keep my commandments and my statutes in accordance with the law that I commanded your fathers and that I sent to you by my servants the prophets. But they would not listen, but were stubborn as their fathers had been, who did not believe in the Lord their God. And they burned their sons and their daughters as offerings and used divination and omens and sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger. Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel and removed them out of his sight. None was left but the tribe of Judah only. So Israel was exiled from their own land to Assyria until this day. whiplash. The last verse of Hosea is a proverb. It's for us. It's not written to the people, it's written to the reader. And to the reader, it says, whoever is wise, let him understand these things. Whoever is discerning, let him know them. For the ways of the Lord are right, and the upright walk in them, but the transgressors stumble in them. What are we to make of that? What are we to make of this book? Romans 11:22, behold, therefore, the goodness and the severity of God, on them which fell severity, but on you goodness, if you continue in his goodness. Otherwise, you will be cut off. Okay. That's the bulk of my sermon. Now, I have this section, and what I'm going to do is just introduce you to it in like 2 minutes. And then you've got to go find the YouTube or find me afterwards, and I'll give you the scriptures, and you can look them up on your own. I'm going to make one point at the end, but I knew that this would be long, and so I just wanted to visually show you that Hosea is all over the New Testament, all over the place. When Jesus fled to Egypt as a child, thus it was fulfilled that the Lord spoke from the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. Twice Jesus interacted with people who were shocked that he would eat with sinners, as this newspaper would say if they had newspapers at the time. Or that he would, his disciples would pluck grains as they walked by. And he quotes Hosea both times saying, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. In Romans 9, verse 25, as indeed he said in Hosea, those who are not my people, I will call my people. And her who is not beloved, I will call beloved. And I know that the picture's incongruent with the scripture, but I couldn't help but visualize this woman who is not beloved and not welcome, being called by Jesus as both beloved and welcome. Hosea is the blueprint of one of the greatest parables of all time, the prodigal son. Because likewise, this father taught him to walk, and the prodigal walked away. Husbands, wives, you've been called to submit and to love, and it's supposed to be just like Jesus and the church. And the relationships we have with our beloved is meant to glorify by showing the relationship with the beloved. 1 Corinthians 15, in a scripture talking about resurrection, Hosea chapter 13, verse 14 is directly quoted, O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? But you've got to look those up on your own if you want to study them more. I'm going to ask this question. If Israel's sin is like adultery, how must ours affect God? I think this is the big one. No book in the New Testament is as adamant directly as the book of Hebrews about how it looks from the divine's perspective when we decide to break the covenant. Hebrews, you know what the writer says it's like whenever we break the covenant? It's like we're crucifying once again the Son of God to our own harm and holding him up to contempt, or as the King James says, to open shame. When we break the covenant, it's like crucifying Jesus all over again. For if we go on sinning deliberately after receiving the knowledge of truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice. The covenant's void. How much worse punishment do you think will be deserved by the one who has trampled underfoot the Son of God and has profaned the blood of the covenant by which he was sanctified and has outraged the Spirit of grace? Spirit of grace. Outrage. Behold the whiplash of a spirit that was given to comfort, who is now outraged when we break covenant. I understand that this is from an Old Testament scripture, but it's not simply an Old Testament concept. Idolatry, covenant breaking, it's like spiritual adultery. So as I prepare to end this study, I'm taking us back to Hosea 3. And I need you to know something. Because you may have done what I did. You may have read it where there was God and Hosea and me. And we're looking at Gomer. Do you want to know how that happened in the New Testament? That would be like us tossing some rocks, looking at a woman on the ground, and we're ready because she deserves it. But then Jesus says, he who is without sin cast the first stone. And suddenly we're looking at that rock differently. You want to know why? Because it's not God and Hosea and you. You're not Hosea. You're Gomer. I'm Gomer. And when I was baptized for the remission of sins, I entered into covenant with God. You entered into covenant with God, if you've done that. And then when you deliberately sin, you're getting sold on an auction block, and nobody wants you. I don't know what to do about the PowerPoint subtitles this time, so I'm just going to keep going. This is what the Lord told Hosea. Hosea, Yahweh saves, is a reflection of Jesus. And God said to Jesus, go. In the same way that God told Hosea, go. And Hosea went and bought her back. So I bought her. She was worth a slave's price, 15 shekels of silver. That's not even a slave's price. So he didn't have enough money, so he had to give other stuff to get enough. A homer and a lethek of barley. Jesus didn't pay with barley or with silver, but with his precious blood. Finally, verse 5. Afterward, the children of Israel shall return and seek the Lord their God and David their king, and they shall come in fear to the Lord and to his goodness in the latter days. There's a lot there. Man, there's so much. But behold the goodness and the severity of God. And if you want to know how God is faithful to his covenant while he still divorced the northern kingdom, you need to read Romans 9 through 11. And you will see the goodness and the severity of God. Okay. What phrase would I give this little book? How can I give you up? It's hard to even... This is the one that gets me. Because this is the divine speaking to us. In that goodness and severity where it's almost like whiplash going back and forth, but I trust that God, even though I can't understand it, I trust that God is just and fair as he goes so quickly between the goodness and the severity. And here he is calling to you now saying, how can I give you up? I'm going to leave you with that. He doesn't want to. But behold his goodness and his severity. If you have never entered into covenant with God, know that those that are outside of his covenant will stand on their own before him in judgment, and your sins will leave you wanting. You'll be lost. Behold the severity of God. If you have entered into covenant with God and then you've broken that covenant, you are also wanting. Behold his severity. And yet he calls, how can I give you up? Come home. If you've walked away, use the feet that he taught you how to walk with and walk right on back. Come one and all as we stand and sing a song.